Arthur Morgan had lived alone on his Montana ranch for 10 years until the bleeding woman knocked at his door. The blizzard howled against the log walls like something alive and hungry. He sat by the fire, Winchester across his knees, amber whiskey catching the light. The pounding came sudden and desperate, 3 sharp strikes that cut through the wind. Arthur rose slow. His boots found the worn grooves in the floorboards. The rifle stayed in his hands. Another round of knocking, weaker this time. He lifted the wooden bar and cracked the door. Snow swirled into the warmth. A woman stood in the white darkness, her dress dark with blood, her face pale as winter sky. She collapsed forward into his arms. Arthur caught her weight, felt the warmth of blood against his shirt. Her breathing came shallow and quick. He shouldered the door closed against the storm and carried her to the hearth. The firelight revealed more than he wanted to see. She was young, maybe 30, with skin the color of burnished copper and hair that had come loose from its pins. Beautiful, even bleeding. A leather satchel hung across her shoulder, clutched tight against her chest. Arthur laid her on the worn couch his father had built. Blood seeped through her dress near the left shoulder. A gunshot wound, clean through the meat, not fatal if tended right. He fetched his medical kit from the kitchen, the same supplies that had kept him breathing through 10 years of solitude. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, cutting away fabric, cleaning the wound, applying pressure. The woman stirred. Her eyes opened, dark as creek water at midnight. "Please," she whispered. "They killed Marcus. They're coming for me." Arthur's jaw tightened. Marcus. He knew that name from the wanted posters that came through town. A freedman with a price on his head. "Who's coming?" Sheriff Dalton. His men. Her fingers tightened on the satchel. "They know about the papers." Arthur stepped back. 10 years of careful isolation, and now this. A wounded fugitive bleeding on his furniture, dragging her troubles into his sanctuary. "You need to leave when the storm passes." "I can't." She tried to sit up, winced, fell back. "They'll kill me like they killed him." "Should have thought of that before you started running with outlaws." Fire sparked in her eyes. "Marcus wasn't an outlaw. He was my husband. A good man." Arthur had heard that before. Everyone's husband was a good man until the law proved otherwise. He turned to stoke the fire, but her voice stopped him. "My name is Adeline Washington. Marcus ran a freight business. We had a house in Helena, land patents, everything legal." Her voice carried the weight of education, of words chosen careful. "Sheriff Dalton wanted what we built." Arthur kept his back to her. Outside, the wind screamed against the windows. Inside, the fire popped and hissed. He had learned long ago that other people's stories were other people's problems. "Rest tonight. Leave in the morning." "They'll find me." "Not my concern." Hoofbeats cut through the storm. Arthur moved to the window, peered through the frost. 3 riders approached through the white curtain, their horses laboring through the deep snow. "Hide," Arthur said. Adeline struggled to her feet, clutching the satchel. Arthur pointed to the bedroom door. She disappeared into the shadows just as the knocking started. This time the sound was different, authoritative, demanding. Arthur opened the door to find Sheriff Dalton on his porch, snow gathering on his hat brim. 2 deputies flanked him, their faces hard with cold and purpose. "Evening, Arthur. Mighty rough night to be out visiting." "Mighty rough night to be chasing ghosts through the snow." Dalton's smile held no warmth. "Looking for a fugitive. Negra woman, wounded, dangerous, might be headed this way." "Haven't seen anyone." "Mind if we look around?" Arthur stepped aside, gesturing them in. They searched the main room, their spurs ringing against the floorboards. One deputy checked the kitchen. The other examined the bedroom door, but didn't open it. "Reward's $500, Dalton said, studying Arthur's face. "Dead or alive." "I'll keep that in mind." "You do that." Dalton touched his hat brim. "Storm's getting worse. We'll be back when it clears." They left tracks in the snow leading back toward town. Arthur watched until they disappeared into the white darkness. Adeline emerged from the bedroom, her face pale but determined. "Why did you lie for me?" Arthur didn't answer. He couldn't answer. Something about her story, about the way she carried herself, didn't match the wanted posters. She moved like a woman who had known comfort, who had built something worth protecting. "Show me the papers." Adeline hesitated, then opened the satchel. She spread documents across the table near the fire. Land deeds, business contracts, bank statements, everything legal, everything proper. Arthur studied the papers in the firelight. Marcus Washington's name appeared on freight contracts with mining companies, shipping manifests, property titles. The man had built an empire from nothing. "How much?" "Enough to make men jealous. Enough to make them kill." Arthur understood jealousy. He understood men who took what they wanted and called it justice. The war had taught him that much. "Sheriff Dalton wanted your husband's business." "He wanted everything. The contracts, the land, the money. When Marcus wouldn't sell, Dalton found another way." Arthur poured himself another whiskey. The amber liquid burned away the taste of other people's troubles, but the burn didn't last long enough. "What's your plan?" "Get to Fort Benton. Federal marshals there know my husband's reputation. They'll listen." "Long way to Fort Benton." "I know." Arthur studied her face in the firelight. She had the look of someone who had lost everything but refused to break. He recognized that look. He had worn it himself. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Snow piled against the windows. The wind howled like something dying. They were trapped together until morning at least. "You can stay tonight. Storm passes, you go your way." "Thank you." Arthur settled into his chair by the fire. The rifle stayed across his knees. 10 years of solitude, and now this. A beautiful widow with blood on her dress and secrets in her satchel. Outside, the Montana winter raged against his walls. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. Between them, unspoken questions hung in the air like smoke. Arthur had lived alone for 10 years. He had a feeling those days were ending. The storm lasted 3 days. Arthur watched it through frost-covered windows, measuring the accumulation against fence posts that disappeared inch by inch. The wind carved new shapes in the drifts, erasing the tracks Sheriff Dalton had left behind. Adeline slept fitfully on the couch, her breathing shallow but steady. Arthur tended the fire, boiled water for tea, changed her bandages when fever made her restless. She spoke in her sleep, calling for Marcus, whispering about papers and promises. On the second morning, she woke clear-headed. "You have an infection," she said, studying the way Arthur favored his left side. "Old wound, acts up in winter." "From the war?" Arthur didn't answer. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handed her one. The liquid was black as creek bottom, bitter as memory. Adeline pulled herself upright, wincing. "Show me." "It's nothing. I was a nurse before I married Marcus, in the colored hospital in St. Louis." Arthur hesitated, then lifted his shirt. The scar ran from his ribs to his hip, puckered and angry. Fresh infection rimmed the edges where old shrapnel worked its way to the surface. Adeline rose on unsteady legs. Her fingers probed the wound with practiced gentleness. Arthur tensed at her touch, not from pain but from the unfamiliar sensation of human contact. "This needs cleaning." "You have laudanum?" "Don't need it." "You will." She heated water, gathered clean cloth, made him lie on the kitchen table. Her hands moved with quiet competence, cleaning the wound, drawing out infection, applying fresh bandages. Arthur gritted his teeth against the pain and studied her face in the lamplight. "Where did you learn to doctor?" "My mother. She birthed half the babies in our county, tended the sick, laid out the dead. Said healing was a gift God gave to women because men were too busy breaking things." Arthur almost smiled. "Sounds like a wise woman." "She was, died of fever the year before I met Marcus." Adeline finished the bandaging, helped Arthur sit up. The pain had lessened to a dull throb. For the first time in months, he could breathe without fire in his side. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Arthur pulled on his shirt, considered the question. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, the fire burned steady and warm. "Don't know." "Yes, you do." Arthur moved to the window, watched the storm reshape his world. Everything familiar disappeared under white uniformity, fence lines, property markers, the boundaries he had built to keep the world at bay. Had a friend in the war, Charlie Mason. Good man, terrible soldier. Couldn't hit a barn from the inside. Adeline waited. Charlie got shot trying to help a wounded Confederate boy. Enemy soldier, understand? Could have left him to die. Arthur's breath fogged the glass. Charlie lived long enough to tell me it was the right thing to do. Said a man's got to choose what kind of person he wants to be. What happened to Charlie? Bled out in my arms. Silence settled between them like snow. Arthur returned to his chair by the fire. Adeline remained at the table, her hands folded in her lap. "I'm sorry. War's full of sorry. Doesn't change anything. It changes you." Arthur looked at her across the room. The firelight caught the gold in her skin, the intelligence in her dark eyes. She understood loss, carried it with the same quiet dignity he recognized in himself. "How long were you married?" 6 years. Met Marcus when he came through St. Louis with his freight wagons. He was different from other men. Saw something in me besides what I could do for him." "What did he see?" "Partnership. Marcus believed in building things together. Said two people working toward the same goal were stronger than one person working alone." Arthur had believed that once. Before the war, before betrayal, before he learned that people were quicksand in expensive clothes. Must have been hard building a business. Some folks didn't like seeing us succeed, made it clear we weren't welcome in their circles, their churches, their establishments. Adeline's voice carried no bitterness, only fact. Marcus said success was the best revenge. Keep building, keep growing, keep proving them wrong. Did it work? For a while. The storm began to weaken on the third day. Arthur ventured outside to check on his livestock, found his cattle huddled in the barn, hungry but alive. The snow reached his waist in places, sculpted into drifts that would take weeks to melt. When he returned, Adeline was examining the contents of her satchel. She spread papers across the table, organizing them with careful precision. "These are Marcus's business records?" "Some of them, the important ones." She held up a leather-bound ledger. "This is what they really want." Arthur opened the book, scanned the entries. Names, dates, amounts. Some entries were marked with small symbols, others with coded abbreviations. What are these symbols? Railroad stations, safe houses. Marcus helped people traveling north. Arthur understood. The Underground Railroad hadn't ended with the war. It had simply changed purpose, helping freed slaves reach territories where they could build new lives. These names, the ones with money amounts, people Marcus helped, and people who helped him. Adeline's finger traced a column of figures. Sheriff Dalton's name appears here. So does Judge Morrison, Mayor Hartwell, half the town council. Arthur studied the entries. Money changed hands, services rendered, favors owed, a careful record of corruption and complicity. Your husband was documenting everything. Marcus believed in evidence, said you couldn't fight injustice without proof. This is why they killed him. This is why they'll kill us both if they find it. Arthur closed the ledger, felt its weight in his hands. 10 years of isolation, and now he held evidence that could topple the corrupt network that ran his territory. The knowledge sat heavy in his chest like a stone. Outside, the wind had died to a whisper. The storm was passing, leaving behind a world transformed. Arthur's familiar landscape lay buried under white silence, every landmark erased. They'll come back when the weather clears. I know. We can't stay here. I know. Arthur looked at Adeline across the table. She met his gaze without flinching, her dark eyes steady and resolute. She had lost everything but refused to surrender. He recognized that stubbornness, that refusal to break. Fort Benton is a hard ride in good weather. In this snow, it's near impossible. I'll try. You'll die. Better than living on my knees. Arthur nodded. He understood that choice, had made it himself in different circumstances. Death before dishonor, dignity before safety. The fire burned low. Outside, the last of the storm clouds drifted east, leaving stars sharp as broken glass against the black sky. Arthur added wood to the coals, watched flames lick at the dry timber. If we're going to do this, we do it right. We? Arthur didn't answer. He was already planning the route, calculating supplies, considering options. 10 years of solitude ending with a choice that would define the rest of his life. Adeline smiled for the first time since she had arrived. The expression transformed her face, revealed the woman she had been before grief marked her features. Marcus would have liked you. Doubt that. He respected men who stood for something, even if he disagreed with them. Arthur poured the last of the coffee, divided it between their cups. The liquid had grown cold and bitter, but it was something to share in the quiet hours before dawn. Outside, his cattle lowed in the barn, waiting for morning feed. Inside, the fire settled into embers, casting long shadows across the room. Arthur and Adeline sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The storm had passed. The real test was just beginning. They rode out before dawn, their horses' breath forming clouds in the brittle air. Arthur had saddled his strongest mare for Adeline, loaded supplies on a pack horse that had weathered 20 Montana winters. The snow crunched under hooves, each step echoing in the crystalline silence. Adeline sat her horse with practiced ease despite her wounded shoulder. She had wrapped Marcus's ledger in oilcloth, secured it inside her coat against her heart. The other papers remained in the satchel, distributed between their saddlebags for safety. Arthur led them north through timber that stood black against the white landscape. He knew these mountains, had hunted every ridge and valley during his years of solitude. The trail to Fort Benton wound through passes that would test both horses and riders. They made good time through the morning, the snow firm enough to support their weight. Arthur kept them to high ground where the wind had carved the drifts thin. Behind them, their tracks marked a clear path through the wilderness. The sound of pursuit reached them at midday. Arthur reined in his horse, held up a hand for silence. The distant rumble of hoofbeats carried on the still air. Multiple riders moving fast despite the snow. How many? Adeline asked. 6, maybe 8. Arthur studied the terrain ahead. The trail narrowed into a canyon where rocky walls rose on both sides. Good cover, but only one way out. Beyond the canyon, the path climbed toward a high pass that would leave them exposed for miles. We can't outrun them. Then we make a stand. Arthur led them into the canyon, found a defensible position among the boulders. He tied the horses in a sheltered alcove, checked his ammunition, handed Adeline a spare rifle. You know how to use this? Marcus taught me. The pursuers appeared at the canyon mouth 20 minutes later. Sheriff Dalton rode in the lead, his face hard as winter stone. 7 men followed, all armed, all determined. Arthur aimed careful, squeezed the trigger. His shot kicked snow near Dalton's horse, sent the animal dancing sideways. The message was clear. Arthur Morgan, Dalton's voice echoed off the canyon walls. You're harboring a fugitive. Hand her over, and we'll let you ride away. Arthur didn't answer. He chambered another round, settled the rifle against his shoulder. Think about this, Arthur. You're throwing away everything for a woman who means nothing to you. Still, Arthur waited. Beside him, Adeline's breathing came steady and controlled. She had found her own shooting position, rifle trained on the men below. Your father wouldn't have wanted this, Dalton called. The words hit Arthur harder than any bullet. His father's memory, invoked by the man who had probably killed him. Arthur's hands tightened on the rifle. Judge Morgan was a good man, Dalton continued. Respected, honest. Shame he died so young. Arthur's finger found the trigger. One shot, and Dalton would join his father in whatever waited beyond the grave. Justice served cold in a Montana canyon. "He didn't die," Arthur said, his voice carrying in the thin air. "He was murdered." "Careful, son. That's a serious accusation." "Not an accusation, a fact." Arthur rose from cover, rifle trained on Dalton's chest. "My father granted land patents to freedmen, legal patents properly filed. You wanted those patents reversed. Your father was old, confused, made mistakes. My father was murdered for doing his job." The words hung in the air between them. Dalton's men shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their weapons. Arthur counted the distance, calculated his chances. "Even if that were true, what's it to you? You've been hiding up here for 10 years, playing hermit. Why start caring now?" Arthur had asked himself the same question. The answer had come to him in the quiet hours before dawn, watching Adeline sleep by the dying fire. Some fights chose you whether you wanted them or not. Because a man's got to choose what kind of person he wants to be. Dalton laughed, the sound harsh in the cold air. Noble words. Let's see how noble you feel when you're swinging from a rope. The sheriff spurred his horse forward. His men followed, spreading out to flank the canyon walls. Arthur fired, worked the bolt, fired again. His shots found their mark, but there were too many of them. A bullet spanged off the rock near his head. Another tugged at his coat sleeve. Arthur rolled to new cover, chambered fresh rounds. Adeline's rifle cracked from her position. One of Dalton's men cried out, clutched his shoulder. She was a better shot than Arthur had expected. The fight lasted minutes but felt like hours. Smoke filled the canyon, mixed with the sharp scent of cordite and fear. Arthur's ammunition ran low. His position was compromised. A rope snaked around his shoulders, jerked tight. Arthur dropped the rifle, clawed at the hemp that burned his throat. Strong hands dragged him from cover, threw him face first into the snow. Dalton's men surrounded him, their rifles trained on his chest. Arthur tasted blood, felt the cold bite of steel against his neck. "Where's the woman?" Arthur looked up through swollen eyes. Adeline was gone, vanished into the rocks and timber. The ledger with her. "She's long gone by now." Dalton's boot caught Arthur in the ribs, drove the breath from his lungs. "You're going to tell me where she went, and you're going to tell me where she hid those papers." "Go to hell!" Another kick, harder this time. Arthur curled around the pain, tasted blood and snow. "String him up," Dalton said. "Maybe that'll loosen his tongue." They dragged Arthur to a dead pine that jutted from the canyon wall. Someone produced a rope, fashioned a noose with practiced efficiency. Arthur felt the hemp scrape against his throat, smelled the resin and death in the fibers. "Last chance, Arthur. Where is she?" Arthur met Dalton's eyes, saw the corruption that had killed his father, murdered Marcus Washington, would kill him given the chance. He thought of Adeline, hoped she had reached safety, hoped the evidence would survive even if he didn't. "I don't know." Dalton nodded to his men. They hauled on the rope, lifted Arthur until his boots cleared the ground. The noose tightened, cut off his air. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. A rifle shot echoed through the canyon. Then another. Dalton's men dove for cover, releasing the rope. Arthur dropped to his knees, clawed at the noose, gasped for breath. More shots from the canyon rim. Precise, methodical. Arthur recognized the rhythm, the spacing between rounds. Adeline had found high ground, was picking off Dalton's men one by one. "Find her!" Dalton roared. "Kill her!" His remaining men scattered, seeking cover among the rocks. Arthur struggled to his feet, lungs burning, throat on fire. He needed to reach Adeline, needed to help her finish what they had started. A hand grabbed his arm. Dalton's face appeared inches from his own, twisted with rage and desperation. "You think you've won? You think one woman with a rifle can stop what's coming?" Arthur smiled through the blood and pain. "I think you're about to find out." Dalton's hand moved to his pistol. Arthur tensed, ready to fight with his bare hands if necessary. But the shot that came next wasn't from Dalton's gun. The sheriff staggered, looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest. He turned toward the canyon rim where Adeline stood silhouetted against the sky, rifle smoking in her hands. "Impossible," Dalton whispered. He fell forward into the snow, his blood melting the white crystals into pink slush. Arthur stood over him, watched the life fade from eyes that had seen too much corruption, caused too much pain. The canyon fell silent except for the wind and the distant sound of retreating hoofbeats. Dalton's surviving men had seen enough, were riding hard for whatever safety they could find. Adeline picked her way down from the rimrock, her rifle still ready. She reached Arthur's side, helped him remove the noose from his throat. "You came back." "Had to. Someone needs to tell this story." Arthur nodded, understanding. The ledger alone wouldn't be enough. They needed witnesses, survivors, people willing to speak truth to power. "The papers?" Adeline patted her coat. "Safe." Arthur looked at Dalton's body, at the empty canyon, at the woman who had risked everything to save him. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. "Fort Benton's still 2 days' ride." "I know. Might be more men waiting." "Probably." Arthur retrieved his rifle, checked the action. The metal was cold against his palms, familiar and comforting. He had made his choice, crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Then we better get moving." They gathered their horses, secured their supplies. The trail ahead wound through high country, where the snow lay deep and the wind cut sharp. But the sky was clear, the path was open, and they rode toward whatever waited beyond the mountains. They reached Fort Benton as the sun touched the western mountains. The military outpost stood against the sky, its walls weathered by wind and time. Smoke rose from chimneys, carrying the scent of burning pine and hot coffee. Arthur and Adeline rode through the gates, their horses weary from 2 days of hard travel. Soldiers watched them with curious eyes, noting the woman's torn dress, the man's rope-burned throat. Marshal William Hayes met them at the headquarters building. A tall man with silver hair and honest eyes, he listened without interruption as Adeline spread Marcus's ledger across his desk. "These are serious accusations," Hayes said, studying the entries. "Serious crimes require serious evidence," Adeline replied. Hayes nodded, understanding the weight of what lay before him. Names, dates, amounts, a careful record of corruption that reached into every corner of the territory. "Sheriff Dalton is dead?" "Shot while resisting arrest," Arthur said. Hayes looked at them both, measuring truth against possibility. "You realize what this means? Half the territorial government is implicated. Then half the territorial government needs to face justice." The marshal closed the ledger, locked it in his safe. "I'll need sworn statements from both of you, depositions that can stand up in federal court." They spent the afternoon with Hayes and his clerk, recounting events in careful detail. Arthur spoke of his father's murder, the years of corruption that followed. Adeline described Marcus's business, the systematic theft of Friedman's property. When they finished, Hayes leaned back in his chair. "This will take time. Investigations, arrests, trials. The machinery of justice moves slow." "Will it move at all?" Arthur asked. "It will. I guarantee it." They found rooms at the fort's guest quarters, their first real beds in days. Arthur lay awake listening to the wind, thinking about the ranch he had left behind. 10 years of solitude, ended by a woman's knock at his door. Adeline found him on the porch at dawn, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. "Regrets?" she asked. "Some. About helping me?" Arthur considered the question. His cattle were scattered, his barn was ash. His quiet life was finished. But something had awakened in him, something that had been sleeping since the war. About waiting so long to help someone. Adeline sat beside him on the rough wooden bench. Her shoulder was healing, the color returning to her cheeks. She looked stronger than the bleeding woman who had collapsed at his door. "What will you do now?" "Don't know. Haven't thought past getting here." "The ranch?" "Probably burned by now. Dalton's men won't have left much standing." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fort come alive around them. Soldiers tended horses. Cooks prepared breakfast. Life continued its steady rhythm despite the upheaval they had caused. "I have a proposition," Adeline said. Arthur waited. Marcus owned property in 3 territories: land, buildings, contracts, all legal, all documented. She pulled papers from her coat. "I can't manage it alone." "You want a partner?" "I want someone I can trust." Arthur studied her face in the morning light. She was offering him a future, a chance to build something instead of hiding from the world. The prospect terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. "What kind of partnership?" "Equal shares, equal say, equal risk." "And if I say no?" "Then you say no, but you won't." Arthur smiled despite himself. She knew him better than he knew himself, had seen through the walls he had built around his heart. "Marcus wouldn't mind?" "Marcus would approve. He believed in second chances." A rider approached the fort, his horse lathered with sweat. Arthur recognized Tom Fletcher, a rancher from the valley below his property. The man's face was grim as he dismounted. "Arthur," Fletcher called, "need to talk to you." They met in the commander's office, Fletcher twisting his hat in weathered hands. "It's about your place," Fletcher said. "Dalton's men came through after you left, burned the house, scattered the cattle." Arthur had expected as much. Still, the news hit him harder than he cared to admit. "How bad?" "House is gone. Barn, too. But the cattle are mostly safe. Me and the other ranchers. We rounded them up, kept them fed." Arthur stared at Fletcher, unable to process the words. "Why?" "Because it was the right thing to do. Your father was a good man, Arthur. Helped a lot of folks over the years. Time we returned the favor." Fletcher shifted his weight, uncomfortable with sentiment. "There's more. We heard about what you did exposing Dalton's corruption. Word travels fast in small communities." "What word?" "That you stood up when it mattered. That you chose the hard right over the easy wrong." Arthur felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he had built around his heart. These people, his neighbors, had seen him run from the world and welcomed him back anyway. "We took up a collection," Fletcher continued. "Enough to rebuild, get you back on your feet. If you want to come back, that is." Arthur looked at Adeline, saw understanding in her dark eyes. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "I'll be back, but not alone." Fletcher glanced at Adeline, smiled slow and genuine. "Ma'am would be welcome too. Community needs good people." The trials began in the fall. Arthur and Adeline testified in federal court, their words carrying the weight of truth. One by one, the corrupt officials fell. Some fled the territory, others faced prison. The land patents were restored. Properties stolen from freedmen were returned to their rightful owners. Justice moved slow, but sure, grinding corruption beneath its inexorable wheels. Arthur rebuilt his ranch with help from neighbors he hadn't known cared. The house rose from ashes, stronger than before. The barn followed, larger and more solid. Adeline managed Marcus's business empire from the new house, turning it into a network that helped freed slaves find land, work, and dignity. She kept Marcus's ledger in a place of honor, a reminder of the price of justice. They married in the spring, a simple ceremony in the rebuilt barn. The whole community attended, ranchers and freedmen standing side by side. Marshall Hayes performed the service, calling it the finest wedding he had ever witnessed. Arthur learned to trust again, to build instead of hide. Adeline learned to love again, to hope instead of merely survive. Together, they created something neither could have achieved alone. The ranch prospered. The freight business expanded. Children played in the yard, where cattle had once grazed in solitude. Arthur's door, once barred against the world, stood open to those who needed sanctuary. On quiet evenings, Arthur and Adeline sat on their porch, watching the mountains catch the last light. They spoke of Marcus, of Arthur's father, of the price of standing up for what was right. "Do you think they would approve?" Adeline asked one evening. Arthur considered the question, thought of the men who had shaped them, the choices that had brought them together. I think they would say we did what needed doing. And now? Arthur looked at his wife, at the home they had built, at the community that had embraced them both. The isolation of his past seemed distant as winter, replaced by the warmth of shared purpose. Now we keep building. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, a new family approached the ranch, their wagon loaded with hopes and dreams. Arthur and Adeline rose to meet them, their door open, their hearts ready to help. Some doors, once opened, changed everything. Arthur's had brought him love, purpose, and a future he had never dared imagine. The bleeding woman who had knocked that winter night had saved more than her own life. She had saved his soul.